Hello, everybody. Welcome to Topline. It's Sam Jacobs. You're listening. I think it's episode 87. I'm joined by Asad Zaman, CEO of Sales Talent Agency, AJ Bruno, CEO of QuotaPath, and Roxanne Petraeus, who's the CEO and co-founder of Ethena. Let me tell you a little bit about Roxanne so that she doesn't have to, and then we'll get into the conversation because it's going to be a great one. Ethena is a compliance training platform startup with intuitive and powerful admin tools that make required training easy, engaging, and effective. She previously consulted for McKinsey, and before that, she was an officer in the U.S. Army. She was deployed to Afghanistan, Cambodia, and Mongolia, I believe. She found that no matter the setting, whether consulting or in the military, there remained an opportunity to make compliance training better, and that's why she started Ethena in 2019 with co-founder Anne Salmson. Roxanne, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
We're excited to have you.
Welcome to Topline, the podcast for the best founders, operators, and investors in B2B tech. Every week, AJ Bruno, Asad Zaman, and me, Sam Jacobs, will break down what's important for you to know to be the most well-informed professionals in the market.
Your deal is almost closed, and all that's left is the security review. But when it comes to those lengthy questionnaires, the endless back and forth can often cause deals to stall out, leaving your deal at risk and dollars on the table. With Vanta questionnaire automation, go-to-market teams can complete security reviews up to 5 times faster, helping you close deals in less time than ever. Visit vanta.com/topline to learn more about questionnaire automation.
We like to make sure that everybody's okay before we move on to the second part that Asad drives. So, Asad, are you okay? Are you safe?
I think so. I think I'm good. I think I'm happy. We're recording these earlier in the day, and I am becoming an adult. I woke up today at 7 a.m. and I feel just fine.
Your hair looks fantastic.
It does.
Yeah, I was giving Asad a little bit of problem before he joined because I was telling Roxanne that he's a little bit of a non-morning person, and maybe he was just rolling out of bed because
I had a meeting before this. How wild is that? I took a client meeting before this. The client wanted to keep talking a bit extra. I had to find my way off it. But I'm doing meetings even before this.
Wow. This is amazing. AJ, how are you? You're flying to San Francisco.
I'll be in San Francisco. This is the last trip of the year. It's my 10th out of 16 weeks of travel. Wow. I am so looking forward to being done. But I'm doing well. Thanksgiving was great. And a great weekend of football for me. Pittsburgh, Penn State. Thank you to your Michigan Wolverines, Sam.
Isn't that amazing? You really gotta play the game. This is what we're all in the arena battling, as Teddy told us. This is what we're doing. Because you gotta show up and play the game.
Yeah, so Penn State will be in the conference championship against Oregon on Saturday, and excited for that. And the Eagles won last night. So it was a great weekend and excited for this week. Feel prepared.
Well,
ready. Oh, by the way, one other point. QuotaPath as I announced this already, but
you can't stop him and then take it back.
Yeah, no, I can't take it back. I'm good. Because I know Ryan Milligan's going to listen to this and be frustrated that I said this, but I don't care. We've surpassed our financial target for the year. So,
AJ.
Well, go.
Take that.
Good job.
Take that.
Well done.
Yeah.
Well, congrats to QuotaPath. Roxanne, how are you?
I'm good. I traveled with my 2 young kids, and nothing disastrous happened. So feeling pretty strong about that. Not a sports person. Really into using sports metaphors though for running a SaaS company. So I don't know what they mean. Yeah, I learned hurry up offense.
Yeah.
Need for a hurry up offense. Don't know what it is, but I like.
We go more quickly.
What's the equivalent in cricket, Asad, for hurry up offense?
Asad,
I don't know. I don't think there is a comparable. There isn't a comparable. No. I found a friend of mine, the old CEO of Sales Impact Academy. He likes watching cricket, so we text each other about cricket now, and we feel cool. We don't feel left out because of you guys anymore.
Yeah. Roxanne, it sounds like you've had some challenging travel trips with your 2 kids previously, though. No issues this time?
No, thankfully they're pretty good. The oldest one is of iPad age. So you just plop that iPad right in front of him, and 2.5 hours later he lands, which is great. But the youngest is 10 months.
And so I feel like there's no reasoning, there's no like opportunity for an iPad, anything like that.
We have twins, so I had no way around some of the challenging trips that we had. So we would always bring like nice gift baskets to the people sitting around us.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
That, like paying them off kind of worked for a little bit, but then, my twins were not easy travelers, so only worked so long.
We're all doing our best.
Well, let's get the docket kicked off. Asad, AJ, what are we talking about today?
We've got such interesting topics today. But let's start with something that really stood out about the business you're running, Roxanne, which is that for business that is at this stage in its life cycle, you guys have quite a roster of clients. You've got huge organizations and some real notable names like Figma, Notion, Pinterest, Strata. And so a nice jumping off point would be, there are many people that shy away from trying to sell to these big customers earlier on in their life cycle for various reasons. The feedback loop is slow, so it's harder to develop product along the way. It's hard to get these customers to buy when you haven't sold to many others before and don't have as much proof of being able to implement and provide value before. So for many reasons, companies shy away from this. You guys leaned into it and then won. Tell us a little bit about that journey. How did you do what so many are afraid to do and so many fail in doing?
Totally. I mean, to be honest, really early on in our journey, we had this great, like our second employee. And one day she was like, I kind of decided that we're just going to go after good logos. Like she sort of said this out of nowhere because she was kind of leading. She was like all things commercial. And then we had my co-founder, who's our CTO and our VP of engineering. So it was like, just split between commercial and engineering. And I just say that because I feel like sometimes good ideas come from like not me, like very frequently good ideas come from not me. And I feel like when you recruit really good people, sometimes they have these insights and it's kind of nice to just like let them run with it. So I was like, okay, sure. Like go try that approach of like, just targeting. She had worked at like a bunch of fancy startups. And so she kind of, was working her network. I was working mine. But I feel like there's kind of two parts to it. One is like referenceable logos, like fancy companies that other like tech companies will recognize. And we read Crossing the Chasm, like I'm sure many of you have. We kind of considered it our Bible. Like our early founder told me to read it, and I was like, this makes sense. And so we just tried to execute that. But there are also like, to your point, kind of enterprise companies within that bucket. So like Figma joined us as a customer when they were much smaller than they are now. They were, kind of looked like a early stage, though very successful startup. But we also had companies like Zendesk and Netflix, like much larger, really early in our journey, like I think year one. And there, I'd say we got a bit lucky. I think, AJ, we were emailing about this. We had a TechCrunch article, and I think that those were really powerful 5 years ago. I'm actually not so sure if they are like now. But it kind of highlighted what we were trying to do, which is like compliance training shouldn't suck. But let's be honest, it always does. You feel like you click through it at the end of the year. You're just like, this is terrible. And so a couple like really influential people at large organizations saw it and forwarded it to their teams. And there, I would say like the sales process I ran was horrible. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I would get on these calls with these people who were very senior. But I just sort of found the like early adopters, exactly a la Crossing the Chasm, and wasn't afraid to have those conversations that were super messy. I had really no product to show them. But these were the type of people who almost were like telling me what the product should be. So I think in that sense kind of got like lucky / followed the Crossing the Chasm playbook. And that's like how we early on adopted or got rather some of the kind of bigger logos.
And were the deal sizable? Like were these like high 5-figure, 6-figure type deals, or were they small deals that then grew over time? What did that look like?
So they were more like the former, like kind of sizable deals, because in our space, which is maybe just a unique quirk of compliance, you're almost always doing a like wall-to-wall land. So you're never like, we're never adopted by, say, a sales team. Like a sales team.
That's interesting.
Right. So it's just a really different motion of like, it's always a top-down enterprise sale because compliance is actually like the origin of the space is fascinating. I know it's like the most boring word ever, but it's kind of like you do compliance to show a regulator or to show if you get in trouble. You kind of say like, hey, we told everyone not to do it. So AJ, not to pick on you, but like AJ is a bad apple. It wasn't the, company is like AJ, like that's what you're trying to do. And so it's really important to have a centralized like record. You need to be able to demonstrate exactly what version of cybersecurity training this person took on what day. And so for that reason, it's such a centralized versus more like PLG type motions.
That was just an example, by the way. I have no
you
open
seem great.
litigation that I know
Easy to
about
believe. Easy to
against
believe.
me.
What are you seeing now? So you've got this really. You exist in this fascinating space. You have customers of all sizes and stages, and the market has evolved so much. You know, I think about this idea of leverage between employer and employees, and it shifts based on demand and supply of talent. So we've seen both extreme ends of it in a 5-year period where at the peak of the market, candidates had all the leverage, and there was this real, you could see the downstream effects of that. And now when the market crashed, the leverage went to the employers. In the background, you've had this DEI movement that picked up steam, then some would say went into this overcorrection zone, and now is the counter momentum to that as well. So there's just a lot of really interesting stuff playing out here that you probably see and hear a lot about. Tell us what is sticking out to you as maybe the big lessons from the last few years, or the things that are real top of mind as you go into next year.
Totally. Yeah, I think like how you characterize it, definitely what we saw quite early in the like sort of, correction period where like the power that the employee sort of had felt like in some ways it super shifted. I'll say that I feel like the companies whose cultures I tend to respect the most actually don't feel like they've had this like massive swing. And it might speak to like just them being very intentional versus pulled by the market in terms of how they built their cultures. So like, companies we work with who were thoughtful, inclusive, like, sort of pre-ZERP, post-ZERP, they're the same. And then, yeah, you're totally right that I've also seen other companies where it was like a total swing. I think that like really good cultures, we have this investor, Hunter Walk, I think we're all of him, and he wrote something about like good cultures are polarizing, like they shouldn't be for everybody. So if your culture is like, we're ethical, smart, and talented, like literally like nobody would describe themselves in the reverse, of like we kind of hire like mediocre at best.
Highly unethical people.
Right. Like
cash bags. That's what we're looking for.
Right. And so I think that companies that kind of, regardless of where the trends are, have kind of stated like, yeah, we're still an ethical and inclusive team. And there might be like a lot of baggage now with the phrase DEI, but like we're still sticking to our company values. And that might not be for everybody, but it is for like a group of employees. And that's kind of who we've attracted. Like, I think that's probably a better way to build culture than to kind of try to like adjust with the market's interest of like, okay, are we pro or anti this? So I think I've just actually seen, like, again, from the companies who I think really get this right, a degree of consistency that maybe it doesn't like look, the market doesn't totally reflect that if you like zoom out.
Where do you come out on, because I think you listen to Topline every once in a while.
Yeah.
You might have heard our debate about, what is the company's role, given like political and socio-political issues. Like, where does Ethena come out internally in terms of, do you take a stance on social issues? Are there specific issues that as a company you care about? Are you closer to like, Brian Armstrong or, the...
We often get confused for each other.
You have a better head of hair than he does.
I did not say that.
Where do you come out in that debate? Because there has been this shift. I agree with you that like culture should be consistent. I also strongly agree with you that there needs to be a point of view embedded in the culture that people can either be repelled by or attracted to. But if it's too generic, it really doesn't mean anything. So how do you interpret your role as the leader of Ethena for the Ethena team?
Yeah. I think that I've always been like kind of transparent to the extent that anyone is transparent in issues that I care about. So like when Roe was repealed, like I wrote about that. I wrote about having a miscarriage a while ago and like how like medical care is like really important to women, like issues that I have an experience with, and I come to the world with a perspective, and I think it's better that I don't like hide that. And so instead I've been like really open about it. And for that reason, I think we've kind of attracted a team that is at least aware of where I stand on things. And so they're not surprised when I take a particular stance. I think that doesn't have to mean that you kind of like have a stream of consciousness that your company has to deal with, right? Like nobody needs to hear my perspective on opening up the New York Times or Wall Street Journal on any given day and just like vomiting that back to the company. I actually think as a leader, and this might be more my experience from the Army, like my job is to lead my team. And I can do that when I have like a steady hand and I'm, to the extent I can, like regulating my own emotions. And so I don't think it has to be this either or of like either we sort of all exist in the like random hot take Slack channel of like spending all of our time not doing work and instead commenting on whatever the issue of the day is. But I do think that that like there are certain like, you know, we have 4 values and one of them is to do our training proud because part of our training is things like sexual harassment prevention. And so there's issues like topics around inclusivity that I think Ethena is just going to have a stronger perspective than a Coinbase may. And I think that's actually super legit as long as everybody is kind of putting them up front such that when a candidate is joining, they kind of know what they got. And they don't feel like they were bamboozled into like, hey, I thought this was NPR, but turns out it's not. And you're like, yeah, that would make sense that like that would be a really disorienting experience. So I guess like long-winded way of saying I'm for like being really like picking where you sit on the spectrum, and then still being really clear that that doesn't mean that like anything goes. Like, I don't think it would be fair if people are like post-election, I can't function. You're like, okay, well, we're a company and we like got to function. And so that's not really an option.
I appreciate that. I think it's actually kind of funny. The debate that Sam is talking about is just one part of it is it was right after the election and having an open forum or discussion or a place for employees to go to talk about this. And I told this to Asad, Sam. I don't think I told you yet, but my wife listened to the show, to that episode, and she was like, I 100% disagree with you, AJ, by the way, which I really appreciated that she had that point of view. But Roxanne, that transparency coming into the organization makes a lot of sense. I think the thing that we think about and we talk a lot about on the show is there's so much going on in the macro that affects us today on the public markets, on venture capital, on crypto and blockchain, and what those policies will look like next year and how does that flow down and liquidity. It's a really interesting opportunity where founder CEOs are very curious about the world. You listen to Topline. I'm sure you listen to lots and lots of other podcasts as well. Our employees, depending on their values, we hope that they're curious, but they're probably not as curious about like what's going on in our world, in like the B2B SaaS world as we typically are. Yeah. So I always wonder, and how do we balance like that emotional strain that we sometimes carry as founders and CEOs with our employee base, which we want to look out for them. We want what's best for them, right? Totally. And so that kind of those moving targets that happen out there in the world, I'd be curious, especially from a compliance standpoint, where it's embedded into your culture, like you're talking about, and you're recommending these. How far out into the future are you looking at some of these things, and then how is that informing your own company and your own direction and your own strategy of what's next and what 2025 might look like?
I got this from someone else, but I'm forgetting the source. Someone said like, being like CEOs, like driving a bus and everybody else is in the back. And so whatever, they have like a windshield or they can't perfectly see. And so it's like your job to try to communicate, like, we're about to hit a bump, or like it's a curve. But after that, it's like smooth sailing, like to the extent you can, because everybody is like playing a role. And that means that not everybody can be in the driver's seat. And so like,
that's not a sports metaphor, by the way.
It's like being a quarterback of a blah, blah, blah. My metaphor stops here because I don't know how it works.
That was inspiring.
We're going to go to states.
We're going to do it. We're going to beat the bad guys and win.
They suck. We rock.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm known for my motivational speeches. And so I do think like if you're kind of talking about, hey, it's pretty important to like lead your team through like economic uncertainty, that I would definitely agree with. And I think that we, for example, like Asad, you mentioned all the logos we have. So you can imagine that Zerp was pretty tough for us initially, right? Because it's like we are wall-to-wall lands and then everybody cuts their team by 20%. Like, that's tricky. And so something I tried to do in those periods is actually like over communicate. And if someone is like, I don't really care about the macro environment, I just want to code, it's like, no problem. But I'm going to kind of be here we actually did like weekly all hands. Because I think that when things are bad, stressful, uncertain, I think the best leadership move is actually to like over communicate. Like people really freak out if the leader like goes away. Like suddenly they're like, are we all getting fired? Is something like super bad happening? They like into the void, they put their own story, and that story is usually much more scary than reality. And so I have tried whether whenever it's sort of a tricky time in either the world or particularly like in our world, to just like really over communicate, lean into transparency. Internally, I remember a long time ago, we started putting our ARR, like, where everyone could see it. And someone asked me like, well, what happens if that number goes down? And I was like, oh, well, then it's like super important we put that number where everyone can see it, because if it's going down, like that's really bad. And I want everyone to know that it's going down and know why. And so I think you can't like, sort of similar to the culture point, like I think sort of sticking with these things through good times and bad can be really powerful and lead to a sense of trust on the other side of a tricky situation, because people saw you there, every week or whatever, kind of like explaining what was going on.
I guess the hard thing about the consistency is that once in a while a new issue becomes mainstream that just wasn't part of the zeitgeist before, right? Like the DEI movement started off with a fair problem that it was solving. There was systemic issues that made it difficult for people from visible minorities as well as women to be able to rise in the workforce. The opportunity wasn't equal, and so there needed to be some fixing. And so there were a lot of...
We fixed it. We did it, guys.
Now it's over. Let's move on, everybody.
Yeah,
Why are you
like
such a pain in the ass?
Like there's like 3 women CEOs of the Fortune 500. Everyone chill out. We got there.
We had Roxanne on Topline. What is the problem?
Like, George W. Bush mission accomplishment for those of you of my
Take me to an aircraft carrier instead.
And so then something pops in, and then you have to like figure out, okay, do we include this? Do we not? How do we integrate this? So like, I guess every 5 to 10 years, something new does enter your cultural framework, which is tricky. Like it's hard to be consistent over like a 20, 30-year period, because you're just not going to know certain things that pop up over time. What are your thoughts on the future of this movement? Because there seems to be a real counter movement to the DEI movement right now. And what are you hearing from your clients and from the market in terms of, if you were to predict what the steady state of this might look like in a couple of years from now, maybe 2 or 3 years out, what would your prediction be?
Yeah, I guess I'll say maybe like 2 things. One is like, my joke comes from a place of like frustration, if I'm being totally honest. So like, I had a venture capitalist ask me if I was pregnant. He is someone you would know. And like, that is in no way surprising. Like, I am probably the like 50th woman to whom, something like that has happened in like a week time period. And so I think it's like, I think it's really important to the extent we all can to like try to understand the perspectives that other people might have, because like then, I have that experience, but I don't have the experience of being 8 other things. And so it's not to say I'm like flawless and, therefore everything I say is perfect. But I think there's just like a real opportunity for people to get curious about other people's perspectives. And I don't think that like journey is done. Like we had a couple years of DEI being kind of a common phrase. And like what my hope would be that there's just still like a fundamental curiosity. And I don't think, I think one of the biggest bummers is seeing sometimes DEI get equated with like a lack of hard work driving meritocracy or whatever. I remember interviewing a candidate. She said something that just like really bummed me out. Like, oh, I'm really excited to join a company that's started by a woman because like, I don't know, I'm going to get like great mat leave and things are going to be great or something. And I was like, oh, I took 3 weeks of maternity leave with my first kid. Like, and that's like not in no way Athena's policy, but I think like there can be this conflation of we're including people and therefore we're like softening our stances, or we're not about excellence. And I'm like, I don't know, my team is like really smart and like tries really hard, but that also, can mean that they come from a variety of backgrounds. Like, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. So that's maybe my like soapbox me.
Yeah, things did get like, just to click in on what you said, because it started off in the right spot. Like, it was solving a real legitimate problem that there would be limited counter debating on, was there a systemic issue to address.
But I would just point out, like, if you look at the trend lines, like maybe there was like brief blips, and improvements around like 2020 and sort of a lot of metrics. And like, basically it's all back to like where it was. And like the improvements were like minuscule. The numbers I know best are like, women CEOs, or like percentage of venture capital that goes to all women founding teams. I think it hit 2.7%. So like, I think there's this perception there's like, holy smokes, everyone got a DEI job. And like, boy, we like really went in the other direction. And I think there's like real merit to feeling like I think it is never good to feel like you can't say something, with like a couple of exceptions now. But there's a few things I'm like really not here for. But otherwise, I think it's very reasonable to like, to be able to have conversations and to be able to like question, why are we doing something a certain way? But I think there's this perception that like things got fixed. And I guess I would like turn it back to like, what's the data for that? Because like,
I don't know if I haven't heard a lot of people debate it from the angle of things got fixed, but I do hear a lot of frustration with what happened to the movement.
And that I think is kind of fair.
Yeah, and there was some fair pushback there. We saw some wild stuff. Like, we had a client that we would all know in this company, on the spot, publicly traded company. They had a DEI initiative internally, so they were hiring for a manager, and they said, for diversity's sake, we're only going to look at female candidates. Which, whenever companies did that type of stuff, I was like, I don't think you're getting what you're solving for, like, by doing that. So they. At one point, there was a candidate who was a gay black man who was disabled, and they decided not to interview him for the sake of diversity. And you're like, what's going on?
I'll also just say, as like an HR compliance company who has hiring and interviewing training, like a lot of red flags.
A lot of red flags there, right? And so I think there was a lot of like misunderstanding of how to solve this problem. We at some point were bringing in trainers. I met with 20 trainers to try and find a trainer that I felt comfortable talking about this topic internally. And the one that we picked was a very compromised decision, but there weren't a lot of great trainers. There were a lot of people that, had a strong point of view of what they wanted this thing to be, and they would come and they would push that agenda and narrative internally. But it felt like there was a lot of room for improvement in how the initiative went forward. So that there was frustration on the other side for these reasons. Right now, I think people they conflate the DEI movement with the woke movement, right? Like, those two things get connected, and everybody's anti-woke right now. And so DEI needs to take a back seat because of that. That seems to be the vibe I see in the market right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's actually a lot that like the research on compliance training can talk to us about this. So I got interested in this space because I read this study that sexual harassment prevention training was making men kind of like worse after training. So they were like less likely to mentor. They were showing more unconscious gender bias after taking sexual harassment prevention training than before.
That's
wild. And I was like, well, that's not good.
Yes.ai enables your CEO, subject matter experts, and other senior leaders to engage prospects directly, creating meaningful connections and boosting response rates. With just one click, your team can strategically involve senior staff to make your outreach more credible and effective. Empower your GTM team to orchestrate your outbound process and say yes to yes.ai. That's YESS.ai.
Why do you think that was the case?
Okay, so I think that the like underlying issues are if you try to address thoughts versus behaviors, that makes people feel like you're policing their thoughts, because like literally you are, and that just like inherently we have this like human backlash to that, right? Like we've all just had Thanksgiving dinner. Like, if you tell somebody that they are bad and that the thoughts they have are bad, like that conversation goes very poorly and it shuts down. So that's like one issue. So instead of focusing on changing thoughts, so like you should think a certain way, you should really just focus on behaviors. So if you are interviewing, do not ask people how old they are. Like, do not ask people, and you can explain why. Like, here are a bunch of reasons why that might make the talent pool like less competitive if you do these certain things. Or you can point to the law, but I think that's generally a less good way to do it, right? It's like, don't do this. Why? Because you'd get in trouble. I don't think that's like I think it's better to like appeal to your company values. Like we're a meritocracy looking for the best people. And if we're screening out people based on whether they have a college degree, but that's not actually necessary for the job, we are like, reducing the talent pool, something like that. So like, I think that's a big part of it. Then I think a second component of like why this backlash happened in particular in the sexual harassment space is that it made men feel afraid to mentor, which is devastating because I think we can all look to like people in our careers who were so instrumental. And usually those, like for me, those experiences in the Army happened running, right? Like a male officer would take me running and we would talk about leadership. And that was so important. And it would be devastating if you took away those experiences. And I think that intentionally or not, some of the training made people feel like, you know what, it's better to just not even have the conversation because the second you have the conversation, you could be, roiled up in some HR investigation and there goes your career. And I think a lot of those fears were overblown, but they aren't totally unrealistic. And so I guess I just like wish, and I'll say like my space isn't the DEI space. DEI training is a type of HR training we offer. We're in the compliance space and the ethics space, but I think there's a lot of like things you can learn, right? Because like, how do you get employees to not do bad stuff is like a pretty broad umbrella. But I think that like having a much more nuanced conversation where people are comfortable, like saying what they really think and what they're really afraid of can unearth a lot of these fears and like result in a much more productive way forward than like some of the things you're mentioning of like, we're only looking for a candidate of X. Where you're just like, oh, that's literally the opposite of what we're trying to do.
That's
here,
not DEI. I'm sorry, you don't understand.
Totally.
If you're doing that. Like,
Roxanne, how you made a comment which I'm quite curious about, which is, you're in the compliance space. You're not in the DEI space.
Yeah.
When you're building trainings, do you, I guess for me, some of the context is that, it used to be diversity and then it was diversity and inclusion and then the E. And I think a lot of people that think about it, or not that's the wrong way of saying it, but the E is the problematic letter. I think sometimes in those three letters, because based on the definition of equity that's passed down, it's equality of outcomes, not necessarily equality of opportunity.
Yeah.
Which I understand, but that's where I think when I've heard people have problem with it, that's where some of the problem comes out. But here's my sort of like thought / question, which is there's like a doctrine that emerges, but I don't know, and like the crazy right-wing people say like it emerges from, from Ivy League education or something like that. I don't know where it comes from, but it percolates through and kind of seeps down into the vernacular, and then it becomes talking points. And to Asad's point, because I had the same experience that he had, where he interviewed 20 trainers, and you're wondering what is the academic background that these people are referencing? Like, how much research have they actually done? Are they self-proclaimed gurus on this particular topic, self-anointed, or did they actually receive a degree in whatever the topic is that they're training around?
Yeah.
And I imagine you have to accommodate some of that, because unless to the point, you're like, listen, we have a policy. It's the law. What we teach and what we do training on is if you're in violation of the law, yes or no, then that's what we teach you. We teach you what material non-public information is, and it's pretty easy to, and there are established guidelines for answering that question.
Yeah.
Did you feel that pressure of different kinds of doctrine over the last couple? And it's not even related to DEI, maybe it's related to whatever it is, but where you're asked to do training, objective training, this is good or this is bad, or make a judgment call on stuff that doesn't actually have like a legal necessarily background, but has sort of a society, like a social behavioral context. You're like, hey, you're supposed to teach people that this is bad. You're like, well, I didn't know it was bad. It was okay a year ago. It's like, well, it's not okay now. Put it into the training.
Yeah, I think I get the gist of it, and like push me if I don't kind of get where you're going.
I'm sorry for being rambling, and
no, it's all good.
Sam never does that when he asks questions.
No, well, it's like a messy space. I get it. Okay, so what we do is we have a bunch of different courses. They're all e-learning, and we update them all the time because things change all the time. From regulations, from best practices, all of it. Something that has been super important to us is actually to like spend a lot of time with lawyers. So with international law firms, because actually like you think this is complicated just in the US setting, that like holy smokes, when you go global, like everything is, you just add in like 8 million more factors. But we have to teach to usually state standards. In the US, it's state, globally, they're country, sometimes it's even municipality. And kind of much more back to like go to market type things. One thing that is a pain for companies but is great for us is that the like matrix is very complicated, and when you have a distributed team, it makes it more complicated. So California has a slightly different definition of what you need to train to for sexual harassment prevention than does New York, than does Chicago, which is slightly different than Illinois. Like it's that level of specificity. And so,
and I assume it's a lot like GDPR, where it's always
it is exactly like
evolving.
GDPR. Exactly right. Which is another topic that we cover in CCPA, and because we have like data privacy. So like, that's actually a perfect analogy in terms of the complexity and different regimes kind of having different frameworks. And so why companies come to us is they want to stay abreast of all of these laws. And so that's what we do. But then they want to do it in a way that like, I always think like if you like I was in the Army and I was a woman, I was in special operations, there were like basically no women. And I kind of learned, you might be picking out that like humor is a pretty good way to like not piss people off, because if you're like funny, then you're not scary. And so it's like super important that we kind of like do the, spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down kind of vibe for the training. Not so much for like Sam, to your point, like MNPI or like sort of financial compliance. There, our goal is to be as short, succinct, and memorable as possible, and then get out of your way. For the HR type stuff, that's where you can really cause like an internal hullabaloo if you don't get it right, because you could have someone who feels like this is against their religion and someone who feels like this is against their identity. And, these are the types of issues that companies don't want to be dealing with. And so there, one of the like very small nuanced things we did is very early on, employees can rate every piece of training every 5 minutes, like an Uber ride up or down. And I think that has really helped us, because historically compliance was a very like, you're going to sit through this training and we don't really care if you like it or not because you got to be here. So deal with it. And what we wanted to do is like do a small thing that I think some of the best tech has done, which is recognize that your end user might not be your buyer. So our buyer is legal, but our, the random engineer who has to take the training, like that person is our user. And so making sure that they have a voice that we can then look at and say like, wow, this particular 5 minutes of training on pregnancy in the workforce, like super didn't land. Why didn't it land? And can kind of like go back and iterate on that, I think has been one of the only ways that you can make good training, because it sounds like you've both had experiences sort of picking trainers where, if I'm getting it right, it's felt like they didn't have your employees as the customer, but they are the customer. And like, that's really important. And like, yeah, you should be challenged, but you shouldn't be so challenged that you're pissed off and tune out. Like that's.
I felt like when I met them, I would ask them this one question, which was a real scenario that our business had dealt with. There was a high-flying startup that was building out its SDR team, and there were 2 finalists for an SDR role, and one scored significantly better than the other. And then they called us and they said, listen, we've decided that we have to reject this person because he's a white guy. It was like a kid. He just graduated from university. He was a white kid. We're like, he's by far the best candidate. Like, what do you want us to say to him? Because you're saying it's because of the color of his skin. That seems like kind of a weird way to go, and we can't give that message. And they were like, I don't know. We just don't. We're not going to hire a white person for this role. So we then went and asked every trainer that question. We're like, if you dealt with this, do you think it's fair? What would your point of view be on this? How would you deal with it?
Actually making me nervous. I'll just say like, this is like both like as like what you're supposed to do, and then just like legally, like, because our other product is an employee hotline, and these are like the types of like, this is very bad.
It's wild, right? Like, and this was happening, and the people were being as if they were in the morally correct position saying this, and we were the mean ones coming and debating it. Like, they would look at us and be like, why are you debating this? This is the right thing to do. And it's like, have you lost your minds? This kid, like, he's a single mother, child, hard life.
But I actually think like that's all irrelevant. It's just like, if you've set up a fair process and someone has emerged as the correct candidate, like that's.
So I can tell you, the 20 trainers I would ask this question, a majority of them said, that's the right thing to do, though. At some point he benefited from being a white person, and that's how you create balance. I was like, good grief. And so it felt like they had a view rather than like this objective thing they were coming to teach us. and they were going to show us the entire spectrum of opinions and how to think about it. They were coming in with like this sharp point of view that was very like a personal perspective rather than like a academic perspective.
That's why it's like that's why I find I like this conversation a lot. And Roxanne, I don't mean to make you, because simply because you're a woman, like the spokesperson for DEI.
Well, I was actually kind of gonna I have a question to you all. I always get really nervous in these types of conversations because I'm a SaaS founder. I raised $50 million in venture capital. I run a really great team, and sometimes I get nervous being seen as a woman who talks about women stuff. And I feel like it's necessary in some spaces because otherwise, it doesn't get raised. But I actually always get worried when it tips too much because that's one of the biggest concerns I think as a woman in the space is being seen as the woman in the space, not the awesome CEO, not the whatever. I guess I'm just actually curious if that lands.
Of course it lands. I mean, it lands for me, and for me, I'm asking first because you articulated, you have a point of view on it, but also because you're teaching training, and that's my fundamental.
Totally.
I guess at the center of my angst, maybe is the right word for it, is this idea that certain ideas are presented as orthodoxy that haven't had an opportunity to be vetted, and so they become adopted. And exactly to your point, I loved what you said, which is curiosity, right? Which is that's the way that we should be approaching a lot of these conversations. And it's not my experience. I'm in a group chat with a bunch of people, and some of them are strident Democrats, and they're just perfectly ready to write off half the country as as racist, sexist, xenophobic idiots, and not approach it with any curiosity. And so the reason I'm asking you isn't necessarily because you're a woman; it's because you're teaching training.
No, totally.
And I'm always wondering, how does it filter down? Because these ideas are somewhat fresh, and it doesn't mean that they're wrong or they're right. It just means, and it certainly doesn't mean that we don't need more female founders or more diversity. But even in Asad's question, I've struggled with that same thing, and I don't even come out in the same place that Asad does, to be completely honest with you. I think if you want, but again, this is I'm getting nervous for what I'm about to say because there's this.
This is a safe space.
It's so not. But because AJ and his family are sitting judging all of us as.
Look at AJ, man. Just
because my point is if you want more diversity, I don't see a way. Again, you're you idiot, but I'm ready to be educated. But I think you'd be you want more women founders, you got to be we're just, the next investment we're going to make is to a woman. That's it.
I see what you're saying. You're in some ways,
these people are we're not going to hire this white kid. It's I can't. How can you not say that? If you want diversity, you got to go out and find him. You got to say, I want a woman for this role. I'm going to have a woman for this role, and I appreciate that.
But Sam, doesn't that hold on? There's the equal opportunity, and then the outcome. And there's a spectrum of opinions there. Some people will say they want equal outcomes for everyone. And that's communism, right? At the extreme end of it. But I think a much larger group of people say it's nice to solve for having equal opportunity. And then let's see where it all goes from here.
Well, yeah, I would strongly come down on the make sure the process is optimized for what you think it's optimized, what you actually want. And that sounds so obvious, but I think sometimes, so there's a study about the VCs asking women founders questions. And, it's old, but it was women got asked more risk focused questions. So how are you going to guard against competitors? What happens if Google does what you do? That kind of stuff. And men got asked more sort of possibility questions. What if this goes right? What's the next product you would add? And the reason that they said that this was salient is because if you're asked questions like, how are you going to guard against, competitors entering, you're sort of you mirror that. You go on your back foot. You're how am I going to do that? And if you're asked dream with me questions, you dream with me. So I guess I would say one thing is I think people assume.
I really like that term, dream with me question.
That's a great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I'm writing that down.
And so I think that people think our systems are pure. And I don't know, have you really kicked the tires on it? Go ask, your hiring managers, what their process is. And I think you'll sometimes be shocked if you haven't put forward a really intentional process. They're I know in the first 3 minutes if this guy's good or not. do you? Like, you know, I've did like any rigorous analysis to tell if your gut is like right. So like that would be my first point, Sam, is just like I think that people's systems are not nearly as systematic as they think they are. And that doesn't mean we all have to like, I don't know, leave it up to AI or something to like that would go great. But it does mean that you should like be really thoughtful about how you construct, whether it's like a VC taking a pitch meeting or interviewing a candidate. I do see your point, Sam, that if you're like, hey, if we're just going to keep basically doing what we're doing, we're probably going to get the outcomes we're going to get. And to that, I would say like that's where I think mentorship is pretty magical. So Hunter again, he passed on our seed round, I think, and he like told me later he was like, "You pitched a company," and I was like, "Yeah," and he's like, "No, you got to pitch a vision." I was like, "Okay, well, no one told me that there was like a big difference, and if maybe I had had like one prep meeting because like." You know, there's all this data and like women are kind of judged by their past performance versus their future potential. And so like, I don't talk about the fact that I bootstrapped a company and sold it because I thought that was a failure. And like, you guys didn't want to hear that. You wanted to hear like that I'm going to be like crypto and like future rails of the economy. And so I think that like, that's kind of where like, if you can think about like if you're a VC and you can think about like is there any sort of way that I could offer it up to everybody? But like, hey, does anyone want a 15-minute prep call beforehand and sort of like give some guidance, and you give the same guidance to everybody. You don't say like white guys need not apply. Like that's not the vibe. I think there's like really small things you can do that like that will result in the change in outcomes, because otherwise you kind of have to believe that women just aren't as talented. And that there's like no sort of fair meritocratic system that will result in like women getting through more, as an example. And like, I just tend to not believe that.
Do you feel that professions in which pattern matching is such a core part of the job, this type of stuff happens more, where like these biases come into play almost subconsciously? I notice this with hiring managers all the time. Really got along with that person, that candidate's the best, and you realize like they grew up in a similar neighborhood, played the same sport, like they had a lot of similarities versus if they'd met me when I'm young. I don't know basketball, I don't know soccer, I don't know football, I don't know hockey. There'd be nothing to like, I've not lived in Burlington, you know, it's not going to connect the same way. And so do you find that roles like investing, which has so much pattern matching in it, those biases play out a bit more and are more entrenched for some reason?
I think so, but I actually think so at the early stage, which is kind of devastating, because then it's like, well, if you don't get past the first round, there's like, you know, like you're not really playing the game. Sure, there's a better sports metaphor, but I don't have it.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good
one. Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Let me mansplain and be like,
honestly, sports is the one area where
good job, Roxanne, you're doing great.
It's the ball down the field to the goal. I don't know. Yeah. So I actually think early stage like is kind of what I've seen is where it's sort of vibes, that's like the most pernicious, because what else are you assessing based on, right? There's no, like you take two people, both of
the same thing with junior employees, like first job people. Like, so any role where it's the person's first job, where you're making the hire based on talent and you don't have experience to really dig into that much. And so an SDR is a really good example. You're making a bet on potential at that point, right? And so then like the vibes thing comes into play so much more. Whereas like later, if you're hiring a CRO, you've got this huge track record that you can dig into to really develop an analytical point of view on whether this person has the skills and domain knowledge to be able to do this job. That's a really interesting point.
Totally. I've always felt more comfortable like the later we get, because I don't have to say like, believe me, I'm going to like sell to this massive Fortune 50 company. I'm going to do this. I could just be like, see this data, like it keeps going up. Like this is what you wanted, right? But early stages, it is really intimidating, especially if like you just think about how many opportunities certain groups have to kind of say they're going to change the world. Like that's just not a thing that you like. Now as a parent, I sort of think a lot about like, okay, how could I encourage the kids to be entrepreneurs? And you realize like you got to like really tell them some like utterly unrealistic stuff. Like you could succeed in something that's like super hard, and like I'm not totally sure you have the skill set to do this, but like I'm going to kind of like help you fake it till you make it. That isn't like a skill set we train into everybody.
No, and there's some cultures like mine where it's the absolute opposite. Like parents have said to many people I know in my family, don't believe you're that special. Like that has been said so many times.
My therapist said that to me.
Slightly different situation.
What?
But is it?
I hope we fired that therapist.
It's anyway. It's all Enneagram stuff.
Hey.
Sorry to interrupt you, Asad. I think you're capable of a great deal.
Oh, I do too. But this would come out, and you see these cultures, especially from Asia, where you get pushed to become a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. That's kind of that game playing out,
Totally.
right? Like all these other places where the probability of success is lower. Don't dream, don't think, don't try. Do this thing. It's the safest way for you to have security in life.
Yeah,
so
and I think that's
the opposite end of the spectrum.
I think that's what's like really magical about America. Like my dad's an immigrant,
really
and I just think it's like the coolest thing. I think some of the things that kind of can make me sad about a feeling of pessimism is like this country rocks. Like it's so cool that you could just like give a kid, woman, some capital and be like, go build something really special. And like I wouldn't want any of the like inclusion sort of rhetoric to like eclipse what I think fundamentally it just should be about, which is like you got like really great people together. They're super motivated, they're creative, they're ambitious, and like it might look like they might, not whatever, have like played football at Dartmouth or something, but like they can be like pretty awesome and do really cool things. And I think that's just like an incredibly special part of our ecosystem that like I just like hope to see continue.
Yeah, I think
100%.
I love that part of it. I think that that's a big piece of this in terms of just all of this information that's changing or what's taking us down different tracks on a daily basis. At the end of the day, you think back to those magical moments. I'm sure you had investor meetings that didn't go well, but that feedback that you were given in terms of come dream with me, let's have that vision, like that stuck with you. And so you can remember those magical moments where an investor gets it. They're like, oh, I get it.
Yeah, or at least give you like the benefit of the doubt. Like sometimes there's, or even a customer, right? He's just like, this is totally not baked, and you know what? I'm betting on you. Like, let's do this. Like, I think we're all just like, have benefited so much from those moments that like really are quite pivotal.
And I 100% agree, and magical, and like things that you can find in this country that a lot of other countries don't have that same opportunity to do so.
Should we chant USA? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, let's sort of do. Well, only two of us here actually live in the U.S. Right now, Roxanne. So to be fair, only two of us can do that.
I'm not renouncing my citizenship. I'm a proud American citizen.
And I admire from afar.
Well, Roxanne, we're kind of coming up on wrapping up on some things, but I know there was a bunch of topics that we could dive into. I kind of just open it to you, and as a Topline listener and just being on the show, or there's some other topics that you want to like continue to talk through and dive into before we get to our wins of the week or shout outs?
It's very funny. I have all hands. So I should probably
you have to jump.
Oh, you have to
I
go.
should probably jump. Yeah. But this is like
to that.
See, well, I told my team I was going to probably be running late if they anticipated my big mouth. No, but I mean, I really like what you guys are doing, and I think it's like really great to have a space where people can kind of talk through like actual challenges they're working through, because I think so much of tech can be like #crushing it all the time sort of stuff, and like that's not the content that's very valuable. Like mentioned, I really liked the episode I just listened to with the Gainsight CEO, because like we just moved our he seems like he rocks because we just moved we moved a year ago our upsells to CSMs, and I think like talking about that as like messy transitions and kind of how you can evolve like different teams is like really valuable content. So I appreciate getting to play ball
on our court with all the things.
Yeah.
Before you, any shout out or win of the week, any person, customer, teammate that you want us to know about?
Okay, I would like to shout out Tess and Liz. Tess leads our sales team, and Liz just closed kind of her biggest deal
Awesome.
During Thanksgiving, and it was really cool. And they rock. So
that's awesome.
A shout out.
Well, let's make
and that'll force them to listen to this episode.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it works.
ABM. Go celebrate those wins with them at your all hands.
Awesome.
And let you go. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so for having us.
Thanks for doing it.
Very nice to meet you.
That was cool.
That was great perspectives.
I am conscious when she, it's like, it's not always, it doesn't feel awesome always like making the woman defend, women's rights, or like the conversation, having her be like a spokesperson for DEI. But I do appreciate that we were able to have like an open, honest conversation about it for sure.
Well, it's interesting as the context behind. I agree with Sam. Your point was like, hey, there's a real like her company, from a company perspective on the compliance side, this is actually, she's a spokesperson for that.
Yeah.
And I think that intersection is the right intersection. Asad, did you fire that client that asked you, or are you still working with them today?
We are not working with either of them today. The amount of these that have happened, this was not like an isolated incident, though. That's the wild thing. For like a period of time, we were dealing with this back and forth on a weekly basis. It had become insane.
And I think the thing that stuck out to me were like conversations, like you start to understand where like making it for people nervous, but keeping it open and just a very honest conversation about like what's
that's the whole deal. The whole deal for me is like the curiosity point is let's all walk into it and let's assume that nobody can say anything that's going to quote unquote, get them canceled. And I think one of the things that happened, whether maybe it's the woke movement, I don't know, but it's the act of being offended became the dominant, the overarching and most important and primary theme of an interaction. If you were offended, then you assumed a greater power stance relative to the
somehow I should care that you were offended. Why do I care? Like, you were offended. It's very like subjective to you.
I told you all about that conversation I had with that CEO recently, where I made that comment. AJ, did you hear about that conversation? I think you did. Maybe you didn't. It's a very good story.
You should retell it right now.
I can't tell all of it.
I did hear. I do know the story you're talking about. This is a safe space, Sam. This is a safe space.
But he's like, what do you think I should do? I was like, I think you should pay your bills. I think that's what it means to be an adult in the world. And he said, what did you just say? I think you should pay your bill. Well, he sent you an invoice. Just pay it. That's all. He's like, what did you just say? And then you insulted me. And it just became this thing. And it was clear it was a trope. It was a device that he uses.
Yeah.
Distraction.
Like,
it's manipulation.
If I act shocked and indignant, therefore I'm winning. And I'm like, I didn't want to offend you. I'm really just here looking for the $5,000 that you owe me.
That you owe.
Well, and Roxanne pointed it back to, I was going to jump in at this point, but I think she made the point well on outcomes and just pointing it back to outcomes. And like, that's what, for us from an investor standpoint, in any situation and taking the non-emotional objective point of view out of it is just what's the best outcome for the business, for the investor, for creating shareholder value.
Here's what I learned in this whole madness that took place. The amount of companies that had implemented intense policies without actually going and understanding what they're trying to do and how this works and what these things mean. Even something as simple as there's DEI. The first word is D, right? And within diversity, there's primary and secondary measures of diversity. All of the DEI movement, the majority of it was on the primary measures of diversity. Everybody didn't take into account the secondary measures like, which school of thought you come from on a particular topic, etc., right? And then the E and I and how this would impact those things and how you're trying to create a balance between these three areas. That's what you're trying to do, because if you over-index in one, you actually suffer on the other. But companies, large companies, billion-dollar companies had implemented huge initiatives without really going and understanding everything, which created the opposite of what they were trying to create, which created the opposite of a safe space. And it was just fascinating to see how that played out.
I just like, and again, this is, I'm sorry. I think I'm a kind person. I appreciate, dear listener, if you
wrote the book.
I'm not a nice person. But, like, it was D&I, and then one day it was DEI.
Yeah.
And who decided? Is there a governing body? There isn't. It's one day somebody shows up, they're like, yeah, we're saying DEI now. Okay, sure. Who decided that we're going to say that? They did. Who's they? I don't know, but they decided. Anyway, I just sound like an old curmudgeon. Everybody's unsubscribing from this podcast feed.
I think Roxanne more than made up for it.
Mother. Shout outs, wins of the week, maybe?
Sure. I'll
Go
start.
for it, AJ.
I last week, both Cole on my team and Betsy on my team were out for Thanksgiving week. Cole's my co-founder, Betsy runs the CX team, and I've gotten more involved with the customer side of the house. And so I had 10 customer conversations last week, which were really
Nice.
fun and enjoyable. One of those customers was a company called Keep It, based out of Denmark. And Jesse Morris is their VP of RevOps. I connected with him multiple times over the week, and he was just so thoughtful and such a great customer in his feedback and how he was thinking about the future. Was really helpful to Josh, the CXM, who's on the account, and giving him feedback. And I just want to give a shout out to Jesse for being such a great customer and such great feedback. So thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Jesse. Shout out, Jesse. I'll go next.
Jesse. Oh, Jesse, do you know what that's worth? Oh, Jesse.
Man, we haven't had that in a while. The Topline hotline. Oh my goodness.
We're releasing a new podcast format, people. You're going to have to bear with us. It's coming.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be the greatest
fantastic
thing.
Best podcast I've ever listened to after
Greatest
It's going to be
thing.
one of the greatest things you've ever experienced.
the history of humanity.
Oh my God.
Better than roast beef.
Oh my,
Better than
roast
ice
beef.
cream.
And I do love roast beef, my
Roast
friends.
beef is the best beef.
One of the best kinds of beef is the roasted kind.
Who's your shout out win of the week, Sam?
I'll go next.
Got a good one for you. Asad wants to go. Asad's going to close this out. Here, I got one for you right now. It's so awesome. All right, so I moved to Spain, and I wanted a U.S. mailing address for U.S. mail, and I used a company called virtualpostmail.com, and I wish I had gotten this years ago, because one of my phobias has been going to the mailbox and getting the mail. I have a fear. I have an aversion to it. I would go months without opening the mail. Bad things would happen. I was thrown in jail one time because I didn't answer a summons. That didn't really happen, but it is true. Like, liens have been placed on my bank accounts because I just didn't open the mail. So anyway, check out Virtual Postmail. They take a picture of every piece of mail that you get, and then you click a little button if you want them to throw it away. You click a button if you want them to open it and scan it, or do something, or send it to you directly. And so it's just freaking awesome. And I get a little email, and I can go through and figure out what's happening in my mail. Virtualpostmail.com, really neat, and pretty cool, pretty neat, pretty good.
That's pretty cool. That is pretty cool.
Yeah, making my life better.
I'll go to close this off. So I read something over this weekend. I don't know who the shout out is to right now, but I'll figure it out as I talk. There was a data point that was fascinating, which is only 0.4% of companies in the United States ever get to 10 million in revenue. And I didn't know that. I didn't know the conversion rate was that low. And I think it's just fascinating, for those who get past it, or to it and past it, what a rarefied air those individuals, those companies, those employees are in. It also speaks to really the fundamental risk a person is taking on when they're joining companies that are early on in their life cycle, the game that they're playing. And I think it's important to know the risk associated with the game that you're playing. That if you are that romantic or pirate, like Lemkin calls them, that likes to work at a company that's at the seed stage or Series A stage, because the upside of knocking it out of the park is just life-changing money. You are playing a game in which 0.4% make it to even the net stage. And this company has to make it to many more stages beyond that for that life-changing outcome to happen. So it was fascinating. It made me just feel very proud of STA for being part of that group, very proud of both of you for being part of that group. And congratulations to everyone that's gotten there and for everyone that's trying. It's really
0.04% of, that's in the US, people. 0.04% of people own businesses that are $10 million or above. That's what that math comes out to. So,
yeah,
interesting stat. Thanks for sharing that, Asad.
There's 32 million businesses in the US.
One last thing. I have one last shout out on that note, and that is to Asad Zaman.
Oh,
this is the text message that I got from Asad on Thanksgiving. And if AJ, you didn't get one, then this will be a point of contention.
I did get one. I did get a text message. I'm going to judge who got the better text message, but I did get a text message.
This is the kind of person this guy is. I'm sitting there on Thanksgiving. I'm in a dogfight of a war with my family because they all think, no, I'm kidding. I was getting along. I love my family. Hello, my brother from another mother. Just wanted to say that as I'm reflecting on the last year or so, I'm just so impressed and inspired by how you've navigated it. You had the business challenges we all had, which were heavy and intense, and then the most intense stuff, life stuff happening at the same time. You came out with wins in every direction and did it by being resilient and decisive. Most would have curled up, but you did the opposite, and it was just very inspiring to see. I'm thankful for being able to witness it and to have spent 150 hours together during the stretch. So proud of you, Sam. Hope you have the best Thanksgiving. What a great guy. What a great guy that Asad Zaman.
Here's what mine said. Happy Thanksgiving, home slice.
Well, I realized as I was giving the shout out, I was creating a little bit of a conflict. And I apologize for making things worse for all of us.
Thanksgiving home slice.
Weakening the fabric of our friendship. Shout out to me. Shout out to Asad. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
This episode was brought to you by AirCall, the business communications intelligence platform. Deliver a better experience for your customers and your teams at AirCall. That's AIRCALL.io. Save time, save money, and improve performance with a single communications platform.
Thanks for listening to Topline. New episodes come out every Sunday. If you like what you heard today, subscribe so you never miss an episode, leave a 5-star review, and share it with your friends. Don't forget to join our Topline Slack channel to connect with us and discuss the topics we cover with other listeners. Click the link in the show notes. Lastly, if you're interested in joining Pavilion, you can learn more about membership at joinpavilion.com/membership. Thanks again for listening.